everyone. Just wanted to jump in real quick before we get started and say a quick thank you to all my patrons on Patreon. Thank you for supporting this class, and I look forward to creating new videos and new content with your support. So thank you very much. Your name should be appearing in this general area right now. Thanks. You. Okay. All right, and okay. Looks like we're all set there. I'll go ahead and share my screen. Oops, hang on one second. Okay. Just making a couple notes here. Then yeah, exercises. Oh man, the first sentence is a great one. And Aurelio, you're truly blessed, and you can't give me a hard time about the gender of the noun.
Not on this one. Not on this one. That's why I posted the video. So here we go. Number one. Renhiome eneuyo in heute, which is obviously some women washing, who were washing some hyenas.
Yeah, some women who are washing some hyenas. As you do, you know, just so I don't like seriously scar anyone for life in terms of Coptic learning. It could also be some shirts, or wait, no, some
coats, right? Some coats or some cloaks, as our Harry Potter friends like to say.
I always get those. I always mix up those two. It's funny, like which vocabulary items are easy depending on how you use a language. Like I can never get things like this right in Coptic. But I feel like if it were some kind of language that, you know, you learn from actual like practical circumstances, it would be easy. Anyway, yeah. So some women who were washing some coats, or some women who are washing some hyenas. And then what's up with this?
So neo is just the imperfect converter, I think. Mm-hmm. So they were washing. And then you stick a relative converter in front, isn't it? Did I get that right?
Relative.
No, it's not relative. It's the, whatchamacallit, the circumstantial, because it is some. It's an undefined subject. As a result, you don't use the relative converter, you use the circumstantial. Eventually I'll get it. The circumstantially.
Yeah.
Is that right?
That's right. You'll definitely eventually get it. It's a thing where, so there is a correlation there. I think it's fine to learn it as a rule. It's one of these funny things where you never know when you're teaching a subject whether you're giving way too much information or too little. So I often err on the side of too much, because you can always just forget it, and I'll forget too and say it again. But the circumstantial is not at all a relative. It truly is a verb form. So it is. Translation doesn't work very well, but if it were not in the imperfect, it would be some women washing some hyenas. But since it's in the imperfect, it's some women in the past washing some hyenas. There's really no way to do that in English without using a relative. So we have to say some women who were washing some hyenas, because it isn't a main verb. And that's really what this does. It pushes all of this out of the position of the main verb. And you can actually think of this initial as doing exactly that. If you imagine kind of like a syntax tree, and you have like the main predicate, just imagine that like you stick an on it, and that just shoves it into a subtree, right? It just takes that whole clause and just pushes it out of the position of main verb. And that's really all means. We call it the circumstantial, you know, modern Coptologists call it that. But I think with a more natural understanding of Coptic, it kind of becomes like, what's it like? Yeah, I don't even have a comparison for this, but it actually like, it clicks that way for you after a while, where it's like Neo Yo and Hen Hoite, they were washing some hyenas, and then Neo Yo hen hoita. They were washing some hyenas. So it's really not relative in a true sense, because the is not in any way connected to the relative pronoun. It is strictly a particle that demotes a clause to non-predicate status.
Mhm.
So, and then there was something else about, so this is an indefinite noun, hin hyome, so some women or women, with an indefinite article, and then this correlation with the construction instead of the relative construction. So I think it would be fine for me to teach that to you as a rule, just like Lambda does, if you always sort of come with me on the idea that like language is not math. And though we have, though philologists have tried for centuries now to pretend that it just isn't. Language is messy. I like the example I gave you last night when we were talking about like linguistic evolution, and I said I have nipples. That's the perfect way. If you can just remember, Christian Casey has nipples. Nature does not work precisely, right? Nature works with rough, broad strokes, and if something isn't in the way, it leaves it there. So, and that's so true of language. So, in the case of how to construct these relatives, like yes, you probably do want to use a circumstantial with an indefinite noun, but only because of the sense that it offers. So if you were to say some women that wash hyenas, you can make that sentence, but now you've created like there is some set of women that wash hyenas that we're all aware of, and I'm saying I have some examples from that. And you almost never want to say that. You almost always want to say the women who wash hyenas, or some women who happen to wash hyenas. So there's a correlation there in English as well as in Coptic. And so we call it the pseudo relative, but that's not really correct. And I think that might be the third time I've gone through all of that. Sorry if it's getting a bit redundant, but like I say, you can always, I always expect you guys to, not always take the best notes or whatever, and just learn through repetition, because that's how I learn as well. Have I mentioned this idea of language learning as, so I feel like there's two main approaches to language learning. There's what I call the fresco method and the watercolor method. In the fresco method, which is the way I learned a lot of classical languages, you kind of take one chapter that's about demonstrative pronouns in Latin, and you just like memorize all the forms, right? And then the next chapter is about like imperfect verb forms, and you memorize all those forms. I call that the fresco method because it's like you're just like taking a little section of wall and like totally completing that section before you move on to the next one. And that's the way a lot of languages are taught. I feel like the way we actually learn languages best is with what I call the watercolor method, which is where you kind of rough in the broad strokes and then gradually refine things over time until you have the whole picture so well that you can almost see it. And then you go put in the little precise ink lines and like make it into a fully formed whole. So yeah, that's, I know I've mentioned that before too, but just to remind you, in case that this explanation of the pseudo relative seems excessive or kind of beyond what we're learning right now, I'm sure I'll mention it again. So yeah, that's a lot on the first sentence, but I think some good stuff in there. Anyway.
It's fine. It makes a lot of sense. I mean, it seems to me also it's more a translation problem than a problem of the original Coptic grammar. We're more comfortable with the who in English than adjectives and participles in general. This problem might go away if you look at Latin or some other language that is more happy with participles and instead of whole sentences. But yeah, anyway, I better move on to
especially.
Yeah. Okay, number 2. Pismod, the form. Entav shiftive ingetiv. The form that he changed himself into. A lot of F's on this one.
Yep.
So entav, that he, shiftive, I think that if is himself, ingetiv, into it. So that's the form, because we can see smod is masculine. There's the P in front. That enter is a perfect relative. So this one actually is a relative. which matches with the correlation you just mentioned. And that's all I can think of.
Yeah, no, that's good. You can tell that, well, you can't tell here. The F doesn't tell you whether it's the same subject. So it could be the form which changed him into him, or it could be a bunch of different things, but your translation is correct. And your way of going about it was also correct. You know, if this were an exam and somebody did it a different way, I wouldn't count it wrong because it's theoretically possible. But also, you know, common sense definitely helps out a lot. The form which he changed himself into it makes a lot more sense than the form which changed him in it or something. Although kind of can trip you up with Gnostic texts sometimes because they get a little abstract. But
yeah, I'd translated it as like the form that changed itself.
Yeah, and that's totally fine. That's a correct translation. So there's always a question about whether we're talking about translation or are we talking about comprehension of the original language. I think this is one where we truly are talking about comprehension because when you have these anaphoric whatever pronouns or whatever they are, the speakers tend to create a sort of mental, whatever you want to call it, graph, network, whatever you want to call it, where they kind of build these connections in their head. And you could do that multiple ways, but it's very likely that the original writer meant it's the form which he changes into it, just because that's a more likely thing. I don't know. All of language is probability to some extent, but then some things are kind of less confident than others. And this is one of such thing. Yeah. Okay.
Number
Sorry.
three. Oh,
sorry. Adjective means his mind. Or
No,
is a mistake?
In Hetef, it literally means in his belly, but it is the pre-pronominal form of the preposition hen. So it would be, we could have hen pesmot, like in the form, or we could have in Hetef, which is the pronominal equivalent. So it's like the form which he changed himself into it, namely into the form. Does that make sense, Claudio?
Yes, thank you. Yeah.
Great. Any other questions about this one? This is kind of this is a good one to practice on because this is a very common thing in Coptic that you will encounter. Lots and lots of pronominal references that are difficult to disambiguate. And like with GT's answer, if you were taking an exam, I would count that. I would give that one full marks because it's a valid translation. But I think Aurelio's answer is probably the best possible answer. Yeah.
One quick addition on Claudio's point about Hetef. I mean, the Het could also be hard, right? But in Coptic, you can't stick the F on there anymore, right, I believe, as you could in the older stages of the language. So
it's het, tef. So the vowel moves on the word heart.
Oh, you still can?
You can. It becomes hete.
Oh, okay.
So it'd be hetef, his heart.
Got it.
Yeah,
it still takes the suffix pronoun. One of those few that does.
It does, and I think what happens is, so as you may know, if you've studied older stages of Egyptian, this word heart is the word hati.
Hati.
So hat is front, and then hati is a nisba, so it's the thing which is in front. So there's a little semi-vowel on the end, like a Y sound. And that's lost when the word is by itself, but it protects the final T. And then when there's a suffix pronoun, it moves the stress because it moves the syllabification of the word, protects the semi-vowel, and produces coincidentally an eta. And that could be influenced by the fact that there's an eta in the absolute form of the word, or it could be this thing that I was talking about in our reading class the other day, monophthongization of some kind of diphthong. So hetayef or something becomes hetef. And it's really by coincidence, both that this vowel is the same in the absolute and pre-pronominal form, and that it ends up being the same form as the pre-pronominal form of the word hey, which means like belly. Hey becomes hate, which is, you know, identical to the absolute form of the word heart. That's also pretty much just a coincidence. Although, you know, whenever we're talking about historical changes, you often have this kind of cross-pollination, right? Things influence one another more or less unintentionally, but then they tend to become the same over time. There's lots of, actually, I think Egyptian is one of the best case studies for looking at that. So, you know, there are all kinds of like folk etymologies that get passed around. But in Egyptian, we can actually see those having a lasting impact on the language itself. So people believe that a word is made up of multiple historical parts, and they will actually slightly tweak the word to make that true in a sort of self-fulfilling etymological prophecy situation, which is really cool. The one that immediately comes to mind is Altkas, I think, or Atkas. What is Atkas? It means marrow. And I think it was originally, like oat kos, bone fat, or bone grease, but then it was thought to mean something else. I forget the other etymology, but the word was actually, like, the spelling was adapted to some different etymology because they believed it. So yeah, you see that. And you see that in English too, like island, right? Why does it have an S in it? Because of the Latin word insula.
Mhm.
Yeah, they're not related. Yeah, so cool stuff like that happens, and we get a great example of it here, where these two words end up being the same coincidentally, although they were originally different, and it creates confusion for students. But yeah, it gets better over time.
Number 3. Uschime enere peschai me emosemate. A woman enere peschai, that her husband me emos loved her emate verily. So
Yeah.
who was really beloved by her husband, I guess we could say a little bit more idiomatically. What's going on in there? So enere peschai. So this one is again the circumstantial converter. Nere is the imperfect, I think, for a nominal subject.
Yep.
And then the only other thing you don't want to get confused by is that the pes really is her, and it has nothing to do with the sky.
Yeah, it could be mistaken for eshai, meaning to write, but it is peshai, her husband. Good.
All right, last one, number 4. Ukera enere pescere shone. A widow, enere pescere, whose child was sick, basically. Same grammatical construction as the one above. Well, almost. Circumstantial converter and imperfect converter.
Yeah. Good. Okay. Thank you, Aurelio. Let me see how many we have. I didn't actually count before. I generally try to do that. 50. Okay, so I'm going to try to go off on fewer tangents as we go along. No promises. Rasmus, do you want to do the next 4?
I can give it a try.
Okay.
So number 5 is Bemeische in Neuaherato Empefkote, which is the multitude who they were standing around him. It's the plural suddenly. The multitude standing around him, I guess.
Yeah, the multitude standing around him is good, although it is imperfect.
Yeah,
but
it's hard to convey the imperfect sense in the relative who was standing around him, but then it sounds like it's a relative sentence. And here, I think again it's the circumstantial imperfect, isn't it?
Yep.
In neo, yeah. So number 6. Pemysterion etunawonheth evol. The mystery which they will reveal, or perhaps passive, the mystery which will be revealed.
Yeah, good.
And here we have etuna. That would be the relative of the first future.
Yes, good. Etuna. Good.
Etuna.
Yeah. And something interesting that I think Lambden mentioned, maybe it's in the chapter for today, but note that although the first future is theoretically bipartite, it can have the direct connection of the direct object. So that's a bit of a precise detail that you don't have to remember right now, but I just note it for future reference.
Yeah.
I have a question about 6. How come it wouldn't be at Sena?
That's a good question. So can anyone answer that? Why is it not at Sena won't have? Sena won't have, sorry. It's, well, the historical reasons I think are maybe beyond our scope. The short answer is that these relative plus suffix pronoun combinations are fixed. So etu is actually the thing that you use. So you can think of it as like, whereas in English, these components are fully independent and separable, which they will reveal it. In Coptic, they really aren't. Which they has kind of become one word. So it just isn't et se, it's etu.
So it's not first present with a na tacked onto it.
Well, if it weren't relative, it would be. So we could say sena won't have. They will reveal it, and that would be a perfectly fine Coptic sentence. But if we want to say which they will reveal it, we have to say etuna won't have.
Oh, okay.
And that's kind of just a rule. Like you also, where you can most clearly see this is in the where can you most clearly see this? That's actually the best case where you can see it. If you look at Lambden, you'll see a chart of all these things. It's like eti, etek, etere, maybe. All the forms are distinct. Eti is kind of a good one because you might imagine that this would be et t, so et plus t, but then you just get eti. So it is, there's not that little t for the first present normally. The suffix pronoun goes directly onto et. And the historical reason for that is that there was a relative thing. It's like a relative base or something. It's not really a full pronoun, neti. And then the suffix pronouns could be added to that. And that's actually a different base from the one that goes with the first present. So the subject pronouns have this to base that they get put on. So you get tui, tuk, tuch, or whatever, all the different forms with their suffix pronouns. And then you get neti, netek, netech, etc. And then, so those are two separate paradigms. And then the neti got the u later on, and then that stuck. So you could at one time say like netsen, but then that gets reanalyzed with the u third person pronoun, and that's the one that it gets, whereas the subject pronoun keeps the sen form. Does that all make sense? Okay. I know it's a little hairy, but it's one of the reasons Lambden does give you all these forms in a table, and that's why he does it, because they really aren't totally predictable based on the first present. Okay. I know that's not the best explanation. The true explanation is that it's a little bit random. There are arbitrary things. Historically, there was a shift from the sen pronoun to the u pronoun for the third person plural, and that took over almost everywhere except in the first present third person plural is se. In the conjunctive, which we're going to learn about later today, if I don't talk too much. That also has that older form. And then in the direct object pronoun that sometimes comes after some verb forms, you still see a descendant of that. But mostly it got replaced by u. So yeah.
All right.
Okay, yeah. I know that's not great, but that's how it is.
Okay, so number 7 is Propetes entapmeische motive. The prophet whom the crowd killed, I think.
Yes. Yeah, the prophet whom the crowd killed.
And then this enta would be just the relative of the first preterite.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Number
You might
8.
note moet is kind of interesting because do you know what verb this is?
It's an expanded version of mo, I guess.
It kind of is. It is a geminated version of mu. So mu comes from moot. Originally, moot, that means die.
Yeah, that
and then if you were to say something like mawet, you would get the factative form, kind of like you get in other Semitic languages, where if you double that middle radical, you get.
In Hebrew, there's something similar.
Yeah, so it goes from die to kill, and then because of something, I guess because of the doubled consonant, it somehow preserved the T. So they are related, but the intransitive versus the factative form of the same verb. Yeah, it's pretty neat.
So number 8, utou if chose, which is a mountain which is exalted, or now I translate it as a relative, but really it's the circumstantial again, combined with a qualitative chose.
Yeah, a mountain being high, or a high mountain. Yeah, exalted is nice, but I think it's a little more mundane than your fine prose. Okay, thanks, Rasmus. Peter, do you want to do 4?
Can I do 1 just for reading practice? I'm still back on.
Yeah.
Hey, I am starting chapter 4 now, so that's cool.
All right. Yeah, totally up to you. But yeah, we'll give you 1 for sure.
Okay. Let's see. Unoch en uain f enni ep et. Now let's see. Ep es et evol hen pagis.
Yeah, gise.
Pagise. Okay. I think there's light in there. There's some light next to of, and then there is evol, which seems like it has lots of different meanings. And then hem is probably in or on. Yep. And pagise. I don't know that one. Yeah.
Gise is like, gise is
right.
raise, but it's like
Rasmus
from
just saying something like that.
So Jose is like,
Okay.
I think it's a qualitative. It's like high, being high, and then gise is like raised up. But pagise is like the whatever you call it, excelsis, the heights.
Oh,
or something.
in the heights.
It's like a
superlative.
Yeah, something like that.
Okay. Okay.
And then I'll tell you that S8 means ground in Egyptian. So FS8.
Something about light on the highest ground.
So let's break it into multiple chunks, and then we'll like solidify each one of them, and then I think you'll be able to put it together because it is a very sensible phrase once you have all the parts. So let's just do this one word. So if esate by itself is a noun that means ground, what is epesate?
I don't know. Yeah, good question.
So as to, it's just like, it's like an arrow pointing in a direction, and then pesate, if that's the definite article. Yeah, to the ground. Okay, and then I'll tell you that neu, interestingly, comes from imiu, so coming, literally, from the, it's a qualitative of e, to come, but it's actually from the pseudo-verbal construction with m that is used for, it's used to express verbs that are just on the point of happening historically. So fneu is like coming.
So there's light coming from the highest part of the ground or something like that, on the highest part of the ground?
There is, so noche means great. So unoch and woin together.
The greatest of lights?
Yeah, it's a great light. Efneu.
There's a great light coming.
Episate.
From out of the highest part of the ground? Or, to the highest part of the ground?
Leave off the highest for now. We'll get to it. Just
there's light coming to the ground.
Yes, and then to the ground is the Coptic way of saying downward. So there's light coming downward, and then evolhem, they kind of go together, but it's literally out in, but it's a Coptic way of expressing the idea of from. So this is something I mentioned before. I'll go ahead and mention again because it takes a while to get used to. Coptic tends to express the origin of movement rather than the result of movement. So there really is no Egyptian word that means from, because they just don't frame it in that same way like we do in English. But you need to translate it from for it to make sense in English.
All right, so if I'm following, let's see, something to the effect of, and again, thanks everybody for your patience.
Yeah, no problem.
There is light.
I think you really want to say there is because you're reading this as when, the existential verboid thing, but it's not that, it's unoch, like a big of light.
Okay, there's a lot of light coming down to the ground from above or something like that.
That's it. A great light coming downward from above.
Oh, okay.
And it's not a complete sentence too, which I think is throwing you off a little bit in your translation. You want to say there is a great light coming down, or you might also try to amend it by saying something like a great light came down or something like that. But it's just a fragment. So it's a great light coming down from above.
Okay.
Without the rest of the sentence. Yeah.
Awesome.
All right. Great. Great job, Peter. Thank you for fighting your way through with that. Like I always say, don't worry about our patience. I think it's really beneficial to take that opportunity as often as possible to really break things down. And I would very easily try to get as much done and not do that. And I think, just like I always say about the watercolor method, a big part of that is coming back later and refining things that you've heard once or twice before. So it doesn't hurt anything for us to, I don't think anyone here has suffered from analyzing something piece by piece like that. It can only help. But yeah. Okay. Dante, do you want to do 4?
Sure. Ulaus F sevtot en ushokevol. A people being prepared completely, or prepared completely. So it's the circumstantial with the qualitative.
Yep.
Right.
Which is allowed.
It's about them being prepared. Yeah. So so it's like, if it wasn't with the circumstantial, you could say a people preparing or being. No, it's still being prepared, I guess. It's clear what it's saying. I'm just having trouble putting it in English accurately.
Yeah, and it is a little weird just because because Coptic uses this very precise construction to express something that we would normally do in English with a passive participle. So we would say a prepared people. Where Coptic really likes to use the circumstantial construction, which is a bit more verbose, I guess. So a prepared people, and then you said prepared perfectly.
Completely.
Completely.
Or like to completion or to finishing or something. Is like in a finishing.
Exactly. That's what it. So it says in a finishing. And this is normally the way that Coptic says perfect. So
okay, perfectly prepared people.
Yeah, or completely. Completely is a fine translation too. I'm not nitpicking that component. But yeah, so it's the idea of something being finished, but also being done fully, and then from that you get to like perfect, like thoroughly completed, and then from that you get the idea of perfection, and I can't think of another word for it, but without error or something like that. All of those ideas are connected in Coptic in the same way that they are in English, so any of those translations. So a completely prepared people.
Usa and Shipe Hetef. So a teacher, we revere him. A teacher who we revere, or a teacher revered by us. Again, it's like, yeah, it's what it says, but the English, I guess it's trying to capture this like circumstantial thing, like thinking it must have some slightly different translation that goes with it as a construction, but maybe there isn't really.
There isn't. English just does not do things in the same way. Like I'll say this now. I've said it before, and I'll say it again. Us translating here now in these circumstances is really just a way of kind of checking ourselves, making sure we've understood the Coptic. It's perfectly fine to read this in your head as Usah in Shipa Hetef and not try to make it into English, because there really is no corresponding English construction. And it is something that Coptic uniquely does. If you start hearing that as just like making something subordinate in a way that it describes something, then it won't, I think it will stop being a source of concern to try to make the English, because English just doesn't have that thing. Like once you're doing something with your brain that you cannot put into English, it stops being anxiety inducing, because it's like, oh, this language just doesn't do that. It just can't be done. It's impossible. And it is impossible. But you could translate this as a awe-inspiring teacher. You can make it an adjective. So you kind of capture that idea that the circumstantial it's made subordinate so that it can directly elaborate on some specific like nominal entity. Or you could say, you could use a relative clause, like a teacher whom I already forgot the translation I used. Who we inspired by, who we are inspired by. A teacher whom we are inspired by. Yeah. Ugh, yeah. That was rough. Yeah. But you can also just phone it in. Both you, Dante, and anyone listening and in future classes, if you get a circumstantial like this where it just does not work in English, you can kind of phone it in and be like, a teacher, circumstantial, we odd before him. And like that, it's not English, but it shows that you know the Coptic, which is actually the point of the English.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. Pesuo enere pio uom evol emof. So the grain that the donkey was chowing down on, sort of.
Yeah, yeah. Uom evol, like I was gonna say eating out, but that no. The grain which I mean, that's literally what it says. It just doesn't have the same implication.
Yeah, I know, right?
The grain which the donkey was chowing down on it, and now I'm hearing that phrase also with an implication. So let's just skip it. I will say that there are two donkeys in my fiction book that I'm writing. One is named Pio, and the other is named Tio. So a little on the nose with the names sometimes, but I purposely put it in there. So if you know Coptic, you can enjoy those little Easter eggs. So yeah, Pio the donkey and Tio the donkey. Okay. Yeah, kind of fun. Anyway.
Emmathetes et sotep ente penchoes. So the disciples that are chosen of our Lord, which sort of in English sounds better, like the chosen disciples of our Lord or something, right?
Yeah, and it sounds better in English, and it's also a fine translation also. It's also a fine translation also. It's fine to make something as like an attributive adjective when in Coptic it's some kind of verb phrase or relative clause, because we just don't say it. So the disciples which chosen of our Lord. Yeah, fine. I will not criticize imperfect English. So
Right.
yeah. Okay.
We call it Kinglish, like some Coptic English, Kinglish or something, right?
Yeah. Yeah, that's like a classic thing. In Egypt, people would always talk about Arabish because that was kind of like the language we spoke to each other. Especially like my Egyptian friends, we would definitely speak to each other in what we would call Arabish because it was not English and it wasn't Arabic. It was like some kind of weird like pidgin that we invented. So we can do that in Coptic too. It's totally fine. And that's pretty normal actually. Like there are a bunch of Egyptological words that are not at all English. And I find myself explaining that, especially if you come to my live stream where I'm talking about like Egyptian concepts, I just use Egyptian words and then I have to stop and explain them because my audience doesn't know what these things are, but we just don't. Like ma'at, what's the English word for ma'at? There really isn't one because it's this philosophical concept. Anyway, okay. So those were good translations. I love the, what was it, Kinglish?
English, yes.
Coptglish.
Konglish, Coplish, yeah, I don't know.
Konglish is taken. Konglish is for Korean. That's a term. I'm not making it up. Just like Singlish for Singaporean English. That's so.
I'm just
Konglish
annoyed
exists.
I'm just annoyed at the Koreans for taking it. But you know, that's fair. I think there are way more Korean English speakers than there are Coptic English speakers.
So what's the word for Coptic within Coptic? Is it like Rem Keti something or other? So
Met Rem and Kime.
Oh, okay. So I mean, it could be some combination of two.
Yeah. Oh man, Kinglish, like Kami. Wait,
Yeah.
Sorry, Kame. Kemenglish. Oh man.
Kemenglish. Yeah.
And
Nice.
this is how you spell it. This is okay. It's official. This is now the term. Yeah, this class will be conducted in Kemenglish.
It's also like the reference you had to the guy with the tattoo back in lesson 4, where he, wrote in hieroglyphs, the different things that he thought was in his mind's eye. And anyway, so same idea.
I know.
What did he do? I missed that. What did he do?
Yeah, you missed it. I'll write it.
You should go back and listen to it. But, yeah.
I'll put it in here because we like, no spoilers, but we're not getting through all these lessons today. So let's just enjoy it. No worries. That's how it happens. I mean, we're here to have fun. We don't need to like be too rigid about it. Somehow he came up with something like this. It was like me, Mened, and so it was me, Menedes.
Yeah, I think you had an owl. I think you had an owl rather than the me symbol. Yeah, the water like basket. Yeah. Right.
Like this. Okay. So I was at Paleface in Austin or just west of Austin, where there are like cliffs for cliff jumping. I used to do that a lot when I was in college, and it's super fun. Love to do that right now. And so we're out, and it's just like, it's like out in the woods, and it's just people like drinking beer and like jumping off the cliffs. You like jump off the cliffs and then climb back up them. So it's kind of like rock climbing, but if you fall, you just fall into the lake. It's really cool.
So he wanted to say my mind's eye?
My mind's eye. Yeah, he had this tattoo on his arm, and I was like, "Oh, you have hieroglyph tattoo," and he was like, "Yeah." I said like, I study ancient Egyptian or whatever, and he's like, "Oh, can you read it?" And I looked at it, and I was like, "Please, her boob, do?" And he was like, "No, it says my mind's eye," and I was just like, "Oh," and then it dawned on me, of course, that it's like he just. And like, so we proceeded to have a conversation, and it was very clear to me that it had never occurred to him that this was not like real ancient Egyptian. And this, I feel like this is a conversation you can only have in Texas. I don't want to insult my people too much, but like only in Texas, only in the state where Ma Ferguson said, if English is good enough for Jesus, it's good enough for our school kids. only in that climate could you have someone sincerely believe that ancient Egyptian was just English language written with pictures of birds and hands and things. Yeah, and he was a big dude. He was like twice my size. I was like, I don't want to piss this guy off, but like that's absurd. I also don't want to be a pedant, you know. It's like cool that he got a hieroglyphic tattoo. I wish he would ask me first. I'll go ahead and put this plug in there since we're talking about it. I help people with tattoos all the time, and I think it's kind of fun. I normally charge like $5 a sentence or something like that, just so people don't abuse it, because I have lots of things to do. But if you are thinking about getting an Egyptian tattoo and you happen to be watching this video, send me an email. I will help you with it, and you know it won't be something silly. It will be correct. Anyway, so yeah. Okay, Kmenglish, my mind's eye. I'll never forget that as long as I live. Especially because it's one of those like, you know, those dreams where you show up to school and you're naked. It's like one of those like super awkward situations where it just gets burned into your memory. Because I definitely had a moment where I was like, did I let on that this is nonsense? Because I really don't want to be the one to tell him. Yeah, that's how that went. Anyway, okay, so now we're on 14. And there's like 4 here. And I have GT. GT, do you want to do these 4?
Sure. Let's see. So, well, start with one that I was confused about. Udodo, F-ho, which is, I was confused about the second word because it's a king and then to his day or something like that.
Ah, interesting.
Day.
So that would be, oops. Oh my gosh, I just did the thing. Yes, I finally caught myself doing it. I typed R-E for pa, because the P looks like an R in Coptic, but I went like all the way around and typed an R for a P. Oh, I'm so glad I finally like recorded myself doing that. Okay, so to his day would be eph ho.
Yeah,
you need the article in there. But
yeah, that
F-ho,
didn't really make sense to me either.
this is a totally different word. It means evil.
Oh, so the king that was evil, something like that.
It's not the king though, it's
Or
a king.
rather, yes.
Yeah, an evil king is the translation of this. If you wanted to say the evil king, it would be Perra, oh man, et ho. So you would use the relative with the definite article. And also that's just a general tendency. If you want to use some kind of verbal thing as an adjective, use the relative construction or the circumstantial construction when it's non-defining. So a king who happens to be evil, an evil king.
Yeah.
In the vocab, it says that ho is a qualitative, but is it a qualitative of a verb, or it's just it?
No, it's defective.
I don't understand. It's defective. Okay.
Yeah,
because you
actual
have to have a verb that means to evil, right?
And you can. Before Coptic, adjective verbs are a big part of Egyptian. Most adjectives are actually, well, that's not most. So an adjective root can be used verbally. You can verb an adjective in Egyptian. You can good or you can big. And it's because Egyptian verbs express both actions and states. And then if you create a stative of that verb, if you create the stative of an adjective verb, you've just gone back around and made an adjective. So very often Egyptian will construct adjectival, especially predicative adjectives with a stative of an adjective verb, which is totally fine. And that's basically what we have here. So you have a verb that means to be evil, and then you have the stative of that to be in a state of having become evil, which means just evil. You go full circle with them. So yeah. Good question. Any other questions on this? Okay. And GT, do you want to do another one?
Wapot F-wait. A cup that is empty or an empty cup.
Good. Yeah. 16.
Okay. 16. Noch insha enere Manahofus Sorte Erof, the great festival that was prepared by monks.
Yeah, that was being prepared by monks. Just
Okay.
minor nitpick, but because it's, what is this?
Yeah, those, and then that's what is that? Is that the relative imperfect?
That is the circumstantial imperfect.
The circumstantial. Mhm.
Yeah. And that distinction, the distinction between relative and circumstantial, will definitely come into focus over time. It's really confusing at first, and it doesn't help that they look almost exactly the same because it's ad versus et. So yeah, the great festival which the monks were preparing it, and you soaped it as something, I suppose. So yeah, which they were preparing it.
How do you tell them apart? Sorry to jump in. The circumstantial and the relative for nominal subjects, or are they the same?
They aren't the same. It would be et. So the great festival which the monks prepare would be Knoch and Sha et. I'm putting a dash in there. Et monachos sobte. I really want to say imolf, but I guess it's erof.
Right.
So that would be this.
If you want to stick an imperfect converter in there, I think the T goes away, doesn't it? And it becomes inere as well.
No, you could say et. I think you can say this. I'm not totally sure. I mean, it makes sense to me, but I can't say whether I've seen it or not.
At least Lambden seems to claim that.
Yeah, I feel like
that you can do without.
This makes sense to me, but it feels very wordy. I feel like you would just use the circumstantial.
Oh, so
yeah,
William actually gives the relative imperfect, and he does it by eta space ne.
Ah, yeah, because it's nominative. That's it. That's why it didn't feel right.
Ah.
Yeah, that's it. Okay, yeah. So you would use the because it's a different relative because it's a nominal sentence now.
Okay. All right. Got it. So etenere or enere. Okay, cool. That makes sense.
Yeah. So like it is the great festival which the monks were preparing it. Use eta. Yeah. Okay, that makes sense to me too. Not something I had ever thought about before. That's why I do this. It's so great. I always find new things every time I do this. All right, any other questions about 16 before we move on? All right, GT, do you want to do 17?
Sure. Prome interata he tehie. The man, and then it would say this is a relative clause. No. Yeah, it's just a relative perfect first perfect clause. And then I couldn't figure out the verb here, but then it's like on the road.
Yeah, rahat is to beat.
That beat the road?
That they, so in tau, rahtef.
Oh, the man that they beat on the road?
Yep. The man who was beaten on the road.
Oh, like the Good Samaritan story.
Yeah, I think so. The man who was beaten on the road. And then the third person plural you can very often treat as passive. I think this is one case where it makes more sense. Or it could be the man whom they beat on the road. Either way, really.
Here's a quick random question I was wondering about. Why does Coptic include dashes on some words? Like in 16, we've got nere m, right? Like that. And then on others, where it's clearly a combination of parts, like verbs and relative makers and that kind of thing. Why does it not do that there? Or is that...
Well,
go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead, Peter.
Oh no, I was just wondering. It seems like it does that just as an outsider inconsistently. Maybe
It
that's
does seem
normal.
that way. It is quite consistent, but Coptic doesn't do any of these things. Modern Coptic typesetters do these things.
Oh, okay, okay.
So, but it is fairly consistent, and you can think of it as let me think of a verb. Let's just do sotem. So if you look up a verb like this, oh no, I want one with all the principal parts. Let's do sotep, set, and sot, and then sotep, and then I need a little dagger, but I can't remember how to make it. I think it's like Alt 7 or something, Alt Shift 7. Hey, that's kind of something. Whatever, this is qualitative. So when you see these four principal parts of the verbs, this is the absolute form, the pre-nominal form. So choose, choose a thing, set, pu, hold, or whatever. When you attach it directly to the noun, we use the dash to signal that form. And then the double slanty sign thing is to signal a coming suffix pronoun, which is obligatory. Whenever you see this double dash, it means that the suffix pronoun is obligatory. And then usually the dagger for the qualitative, but just nothing at the end. So these are all ways of, just by convention, of marking things in grammars or in dictionaries. And then this convention gets borrowed, especially in grammars like in lambdans, when you have the pre-nominal form. So it's like neu sotep, they were choosing, it blends with the suffix pronoun. So the forms of the imperfect converter are ne, pre-pronominal, and nere, pre-nominal. And we're just borrowing the conventions from the verbs here. Because this automatically means it must have a suffix pronoun, and this means it's followed by a noun. So it's just a quick way of indicating to the reader, especially in practice lessons like this, that you're dealing with the nere that you just learned, rather than some other combination of letters that might mean something different.
Okay, and is the T-looking mark next to the ne, is that a holdover from late Middle Egyptian, where it's the y sound? Is that just a folk etymology that I'm creating for myself?
Which ne are you talking about?
So write the first form of ne that you had there again.
Oh, yeah. Let me just undo.
There you go. That right there after the epsilon, like neti, is that a carrier? Is that like a holdover from earlier stages of Egyptian?
That's not neti. That's just an orthographic symbol. It's just two. It's like an equal sign that's slanted upward.
Okay, so it just sort of happens to look like that similar sign in hieroglyphics.
What sign?
Like an abbreviated double read, basically, like a Y.
Yeah.
Oh, right. I see.
It does look like it. Never occurred to me.
Yeah, it never occurred to me before either. And why that sign?
Okay, right there.
It could be related, but I think really, like, the way I think of it, it's kind of like Legos. Like if you imagine all the suffix or it's kind of like molecules in chemistry. You can imagine this has two covalent bonds or whatever, so it can only join to this.
It's more tightly bound. That's why you have it's a double.
Yeah,
I see.
Okay. It's more tightly bound. That actually is the way I think of it, though. I don't
it is
know
true.
if I'd ever articulated it that way, because the suffix pronoun is always obligatory when you see that double equal sign. So if you look up some kind of thing in the dictionary, like for instance, imo, it will have that double equal sign to tell you cannot use this word by itself. It's not allowed. So it's a way of kind of enforcing the necessity of a suffix pronoun. And that's where you see a lot of phrases like in tootef improme, like from him, the man. You have to have that suffix in there, even though it's just immediately repeated by the noun, because in this case, it is strictly obligatory. So it's a way of signaling that, especially if you're using a dictionary, you've never seen this word before, you need to know that it has an obligatory suffix pronoun, but they can't write it on the dictionary form, because then you would have to write 12 forms for every single thing you put in there. So it's a way of signaling that.
And I was just hoping that it was something cool that they were keeping from earlier stages of Egyptian, but no.
It's actually called apparently the double oblique hyphen in English. I'm just looking at it in dictionary. The double oblique hyphen, which developed from a Central European variant of the, I guess, virgule slash, originally a form of scratch comma. Okay, that sounds like a rabbit hole to dive into deeper, dive into more deeply. But I've seen it in medieval texts of European languages where you use it just like we would use the hyphen today.
Oh,
so probably carried over. I mean, like at the end of the line, basically.
Oh yeah, so yeah, it's almost certainly a carryover from that. And where, you know, the sense is being borrowed too, because then the connection is obligatory, it's not optional. Whereas this connection is actually somewhat optional because you can stick anything here. You're not constrained to a specific set of morphemes that you're allowed to use. Yeah, you can even put a whole sentence here. It doesn't really have to be a noun, though it usually is. Okay, and then
thank you.
So we're kind of out of time. I guess I'll just finish part A. So pshe entai nojef ejem kohet, the wood which I threw it upon the fire. I guess I should highlight that sentence. The wood which I threw it upon the fire. Uhemhal ef pahet in nah. Oops, that's a typo for sure. In nahrem pef jois, a servant who kowtowed before his lord, and nete neo epicate ep Jordanes. So those who were coming down to the Jordan River, square brackets. So we'll finish A. I think we'll start on B next time. Start here, May 29th. Okay. Yeah, that's where we'll continue. I hope everyone had fun. I know we talked about, you know, quite a few tangential things, but I think they're interesting anyway. And everyone got a chance to read, which, you know, I'll count that as a win. So I'll see y'all either next week or in 2 seconds for the Allen's Coptic Dialects class.
See you then.
See you.
Okay, bye everyone.
Bye.